What's going on, guys? Welcome back. FantasyTeamAdvisor.com, bringing home the bacon. NFL DFS video. Trying something new. See if you guys like it. If you do, we'll continue to do it. Tonight's Monday Night Football is a little bit different than a normal one. We have two games. We have four teams. We have matchups. We're going to break them down. And then we're going to look at possibly building a DraftKings lineup. Also, on top of that, we can kind of look at the showdown. So I have had some questions. People have been asking for like a single game showdown breakdown for MLB. I was thinking, why not try it for NFL as well? So kind of just looking at this. Now, we do have two, obviously, showdowns. The New Orleans and the Carolina one is not the premier one. The main one is Cleveland at Pittsburgh. So that is the one that is... there's more entries, there's more money to be made there. And we don't normally have, obviously, two Monday Night Football games. So, seeing as how the first couple of weeks have been really wonky, we hit some great touchdown marks and lineups on Sunday, but we still have those ones where people were on Cam Akers, and then he was a healthy inactive, and then Kyron Williams comes in, and Kyron just absolutely shoved Puka yesterday is on pace for 2,000 yards. He has, I think, 20 receptions in two games. So a lot of things have been weird, but a lot of things have been kind of fallen into place. Now, I will admit we were all over the Kansas City-Jacksonville game. It had the highest over-under of 91. It ended up being 26 total. Touchdowns, we got a Travis Kelce touchdown. We were kind of expecting that. We were looking at Calvin Ridley. Should have had a touchdown, didn't have 2 feet in. Ended up 2 receptions, 36 yards. So while we had some things go right, I will admit a lot of my sports bets were off. A lot of them this week. So that being said, I would love to know how you've done so far in week 2. What were the highs and what were the lows? Just kind of very curious what you guys have. So looking at this is our matchup tool here. We've got New Orleans versus Carolina, and then Cleveland versus Pittsburgh, and we're going to break it down. These are all of the players so far. Now, obviously, we've had 2 total weeks, so when we look at some of the stats, players, you're going to see that 2 weeks is really not enough to have feel confident enough. So just kind of looking at this, we'll break it down by team. So let's look at New Orleans real quick. So obviously we got Derek Carr at quarterback, 5,400 on DraftKings, 7,100 on FanDuel. Looking at DVP here on DraftKings, Carolina ranks 21st against the quarterback after 1 week, and then on FanDuel it's 22. We're kind of looking into that same realm where let's get through at least 6 weeks to 4 to 5 to 6 weeks to kind of feel very confident about DVP, to kind of know what the defenses are going to do, to kind of feel like injuries are going to happen, defenses are going to kind of get in a rhythm, or they're going to show us who they really are. So kind of just looking at this, Taysom Hill, depending on what you're on, I believe he's only a tight end, yeah. So I think in season long he can be tight end and QB, but he's only tight end here on DraftKings. So just kind of looking at the quarterback situation here, we've got Derek Carr, kind of seeing what Derek Carr did last week. Game logs 18.6 at 5,300. Now he's 6,000. I'm okay with that. He does get a matchup where we do see overall Carolina ranked 2nd in week 1. Overall, they're 17th in total defense here. So we kind of look at this. What are we looking at? Jamal Williams, running back situation. Jamal Williams, Tony Jones, and Kendre Miller. So just looking at Jamal Williams, last week, game logs, 45 yards on 18 attempts is not a lot. 7.2 fantasy points. He did let down. That is a crazy picture. I'm in the middle of it. Look at this picture. What is he doing? Wild. So Jamal Williams, we know, Green Bay did well. Moved over to Detroit. Dominated last year. Had a down week last week. 45 yards isn't a ton. Then we look at Tony Jones. And you can kind of see Tony Jones only was on 10% of the snaps last week, rushed 3% of the time, had no targets, where we do see, obviously, Jamal Williams. While Kamara is out, Jamal Williams is RB1 there. We know this. That's what we're going to expect. Looking at Tony Jones last week, 5 yards on 1 attempt. He's not really a thing. Unless Jamal Williams gets hurt, he's not really going to be a thing. Same thing, Kendre Miller. We just look at the depth chart here. Did nothing last week. So if I'm using running backs here, we see that Carolina ranks 22nd on DraftKings and 23rd against the run on FanDuel. Moving to wide receivers, we see Chris Olave here, 78% of the snaps, while Michael Thomas had 80% last week. Neither rushed, obviously. And then Chris Olave actually had 30% of the targets, and Michael Thomas had 24%. Rashid actually had 18%. He was also involved in that. So kind of just looking. Let's look at the wide receivers here for New Orleans. Olave coming in had 8 for 112 last week, 22.2 fantasy points, no touchdowns, but I mean he dominated there, 7,200. Michael Thomas is down here. He had 5 receptions on 61 targets, did not have a touchdown, 11.1. Now he's 5,500, where I feel like you could be kind of confident with that. Then Rashid came in 5 for 89 with 1 touchdown. So he was he's 4,200. He might be, just depending, he could be a sneakier option, because when you're looking at this, people are going to be looking at Olave and Michael Thomas. I really like Rashid here. Or Shaheed here, 20 fantasy points per game. He outperformed Michael Thomas, and he had the touchdown last week. So Olave had 22.2. I think everyone will be on Olave at 22.2 fantasy points per game. I think we could come down and save some money on Rashid. So if you are pairing and you are doing stacks, again, Derek Carr with Rashid, and then you kind of got to bring it back in the same game. Maybe. It just depends. With 4 teams, 2 games, you kind of got a little bit crazy when you're building throughout. So looking at that, Rashid might be my favorite wide receiver for New Orleans this week, being on the cheaper end. 4,100 on DraftKings, 5,900 on FanDuel. I like him more on DraftKings. Then we get down to tight ends. Juwan Johnson, Foster Moreau, Jimmy Graham. Now, Jimmy Graham's a good story. Was out of football. Came back to his team, really didn't have any targets last week, only played 13% of the snaps. Moreau played 49% of the snaps, no targets. Juwan Johnson was the only one to have the snaps, 75.38% of the snaps and 15% of the targets overall is what we got out of him. So looking at Juwan Johnson, they're cheap, 4,100, game log, 3 for 36. Even getting that percentage and being out there, they didn't really target him much. So I'm probably off of the tight end position for New Orleans. Kind of looking at that. Over-under is 40.5 in individual team total, 20.68, whereas we have Carolina at 19.12. So Vegas thinks, New Orleans is going to score the most. The ones I would go with would be Derek Carr, Jamal Williams, maybe a little bit. Definitely love me some Rashid Shaheed in this one. Then we can move over to Carolina. Let's just move over here and we can check it out just to kind of see. Now, depending on what we've got quarterback-wise, Andy Dalton, no, he's the backup. Unless something happens to Bryce Young, which we can't. If we put Bryce Young, that's it. We're done. I wouldn't use Bryce Young. Looking at the situation here, 5,200 there, whereas Derek Carr, like I said, was 5,400. I'd rather take Derek Carr in this one. So kind of looking at this, Bryce Young is the one. I'm not going to use him, so I'm out on him. So that brings us to the running back position. We're looking at Miles Sanders and Chuba Hubbard. Now, Miles Sanders obviously is the clear number one. We can kind of see what we're looking at. Miles Sanders, 5,700. He's coming off 12.8 fantasy points. Had a lost fumble last week, 18 attempts, 72 yards. He was also involved in the passing game. 4 receptions on 6 targets for 26 yards. Did not have a touchdown, but he is averaging 12.8 in one game. Again, all of these numbers and averages and DVP, they're kind of going to be skewed because we're only on 1 week of the season. Obviously, again, we need to get at least 4 weeks in, maybe 5, to kind of get that feel. So we're looking at that. I'm not looking at Hubbard. this just feel like the problem is Hubbard is one where I could feel he could vulture a touchdown or two. People are going to be all over Sanders. Hubbard could come in at 5,000. He had 9 attempts for 60 yards last week. He averaged 6.7 on each carry. 2 targets, 2 receptions, 9 yards. So he's involved in the passing game, which is a plus on DraftKings. At 5,000, looking at this, you save 700, and you could have success. Now, with 4 teams, got to get a little bit creative here. Looking at the wide receiver, I wouldn't use Blackshear either. Didn't play last week. I'm off of him. So then we look at the pass catchers here. Adam Thielen, Jonathan Mingo, DJ Shark, Terrace Marshall Jr., and Laviska Shenault Jr. So Terrace actually had the most amount of snaps played outside of Bryce Young at 89%. Adam Thielen was right behind him at 88%. Adam Thielen wasn't really targeted much. Jonathan Mingo was targeted 16% of the time. Terrace Marshall was targeted 19.3% of the time. So looking at the wide receivers, Shark is questionable with a hamstring. He did practice and participated on Saturday. Did not play last week. At 4,000, I'm okay with that if he's in. Adam Thielen, 3,900. He averaged 3.2. He's on the tail end of his career. He's a little bit older for wide receiver, so I'm probably out on Thielen. Looking at Mingo, 3,800. Again, 3.7. He didn't really do much. You get down to Terrace Marshall at 3,300. 2 for 23. But that's it. Like, he played. That's the thing. He had 2 receptions on 6 targets. And this is kind of what you need to look in a little bit more, but you see that he played 89% of the snaps. He was targeted out of everyone 19% of the time. He caught it for 2 catches, did nothing with it, 23 yards. That's not much at all. So kind of looking at this, that brings it down. I honestly really don't like much to do with Carolina outside of Hayden Hurst. Now, we know that Hayden Hurst here, 15.1 at 3,000. Now, he's 4,000. As of now, he appears to be the go-to target. Again, it's 1 week, but if you're using a tight end here, kind of like Hayden Hurst a little bit more than I do like Carolina or New Orleans. So that's what I would use. Outside of that, I wouldn't use really anybody else. If DJ Shark is in, then we could use him as wide receiver, but I really don't want much to do with Bryce Young. Miles Sanders would be an option. Probably using Shark if he's in, and Hayden Hurst for Carolina. So that's kind of the breakdown of the first game. Not a ton to like. Again, I don't love these first games, or these Monday night games normally. We were all over Aaron Rodgers and the Jets in week 1. Yes, they came back, but obviously at what cost? Aaron Rodgers got hurt. So that's obviously, you can't predict that. You can't project that out. So that's what we're looking at. So now we get to the main Monday night game, if you want to say. They start like 20 minutes apart, which is crazy. You would think that maybe we would see the earlier game maybe a little bit earlier, but it wasn't. Now we got Cleveland. We know what they did in week 1. They beat Cincinnati pretty handedly. Over-under is 42.5. Cleveland individual team total is 19.57 compared to 18.53 for Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh played awful last week. We got Deshaun Watson. Whether or not you like him as a person is neither here nor there. If you're trying to make money, you can't really think about how bad of a person he is. We got to look at just the DFS perspective. 21.66 and 6,000 last week. 16 for 29, 55.2% completed. 154 yards. A really low yardage for him. 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Does rush the ball. Got 45 yards rushing and had a rushing touchdown. So that is all into factors. If you want a mobile quarterback, you want to look at him. We can kind of look at that. He is $400 more than Derek Carr. I kind of like Deshaun Watson for $400 more because he's mobile. So probably just throwing him in there as that. So when you have a quarterback, you've got to put 1 or 2 of his pass catchers because that's how you stack points up. If you think Deshaun Watson's going to have a good game, obviously one of his pass catchers are going to have a good game at some point. So looking at that running back situation, you got Nick Chubb. He was only played 48% of the snaps last week. He rushed 45% of those snaps. He was also targeted 13.79. So looking at Chubb at 8,500, very expensive, but has a good matchup after week 1 against Pittsburgh. Last week, 18 attempts, 106 yards. Dominated there. 4 receptions on 4 targets, only 21 yards, but did have 19.7, which is still 2 times value. So I'm throwing Nick Chubb in there. Feel like it's going to be a Cleveland stack. Jerome Ford last week, 2.6 fantasy points. I would not use him. He is not on the list that I would look at. Wouldn't look at Pierre Strong, didn't play last week. Then we get to which pass catcher or pass catchers do you think we need to target with Deshaun Watson? You got Amari Cooper, Elijah Moore, Donovan Peoples-Jones. Now, obviously we see that DPJ played 89% of the snaps, but he was only targeted 6.9% of the time, whereas Elijah Moore, 68% of the snaps, was 24.14%, and then Amari Cooper, same thing, 62% of the snaps, targeted 24% of the time there. So, looking at that, Amari Cooper has a questionable tag, a groin, but it's looking like he's unlikely to play. So, if he is out, that brings me to Elijah Moore. So, if Amari Cooper is actually out and questionable, I'm probably out on that. So, that brings us down to Elijah Moore, Donovan Peoples-Jones, or I guess Marquise Goodwin, who didn't play much last week, who could be a sneaky option if, for the fact that he only did play 10 snaps. But if Cooper is out, that would bump up Goodwin for me as a very cheap option at $3,000. So Elijah Moore had the second best, or the best, not a ton, 3 for 7 for 43 yards. Does rush, though, so they may try to do some, sneaky plays. 2 attempts or for 19 yards. Obviously, his longest was 19 yards. So he got absolutely nowhere in his first one. One of his attempts, he got 19 yards. So 19.2 at 3,800 last week. Now they bumped him up to 4,500, but he is going to be that wide receiver 1 if Amari Cooper is out. So I'm looking at Elijah Moore here. So that's kind of what I'm looking at there. Tight end wise, we've got David Njoku, played 72% of the snaps last week, compared to Harrison Bryant, 36%, and Jordan Akins at 31%. So Njoku here was very cheap last week. I was all over him because of his price discrepancy at 4,200. 2 for 3 for 24 yards. Now, with Amari Cooper out, will we see Njoku come through a little bit more? We could. Will I use him? As of now, not at the moment. That could change throughout the day if, in fact, Amari Cooper is out. So David Njoku would be the one. Really, Harrison Bryant had more. He did more with his stuff because he had a touchdown. If you want to think maybe he vultures a touchdown, at 2,900, I think we could stack him there. So just kind of looking at a stack, Watson, Chubb, Moore, Bryant, I don't mind this. Now, I'm not saying we're going to do a full lineup, but this is kind of what we'll look at. So those are probably the only ones I'm looking at for Cleveland. Again, it'll really focus on Amari Cooper being in or out. Then we got Pittsburgh. You got Kenny Pickett. Okay, again, nothing was going right, and you can't really fault anything. Pittsburgh, nothing was going right last week. He averaged 11.7, 31 for 46. He had to throw it up a bunch. San Francisco was all over him. 11.68, he did actually double his 5,200 salary. He's now 5,400. He is going up against Cleveland, though. Kind of looking at this, Cleveland was a really good offense last week against the quarterback. Kenny Pickett, I don't know if he's the truth or not. Probably don't want anything to do with Kenny Pickett. I think the 2 quarterbacks I would look at on this slate would be Derek Carr or Deshaun Watson. Those are the 2 that I'd look at. So looking at that, I'm not really looking much at Pickett. Then we get into the running back situation. So Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren, Anthony McFarland played a little bit, but that's basically it. Did not rush, was only involved in the passing game. So Najee Harris last week did nothing. 6 for 31, 2 receptions for 2 yards, 5.3 fantasy points. 6,200. Now, can he come back through? He could. But overall, the Cleveland defense was the number 1 defense through week 1. They allowed 3 points per game. Again, 1 week. They only gave up 67 passing yards in week 1. Rushing yards, they did give up 75. So Najee Harris could come through here. They are susceptible to the run. Whether or not that happens, we'll see. Jaylen Warren was the one where, he 3 for 6 for not much, and then saw 6 targets. So when he's in, if he could do anything with it, he could pay off his salary at $4,800, but I don't think he will. Now, Anthony McFarland is out, I guess. Has been ruled out, so he is out. So it's basically, I guess, if you want to go, is he even in? Yeah, so Horvath possibly, if he gets called up, but I don't know if he will. So looking at Najee Harris, I don't mind him, but again, it would only be because Cleveland in week 1 susceptible a little bit to the run. So you could look at Najee Harris if you want. So we move to the wide receivers. You got George Pickens, Allen Robinson, Calvin Austin III, Miles Boykin, Gunnar Olszewski, and Deontay Johnson. Now, Deontay Johnson, supposed to be the wide receiver 1. He's moved down. George Pickens is the wide receiver 1, played 88% of the snaps last week, saw 15% of the targets, where Allen Robinson played the exact same amount of snaps, saw just a slight uptick in the targets of 17.78. So, looking at this, George Pickens, last week, 5 for 7, 36 yards. Really didn't do much. Again, overall, the team didn't do much at all. Now they're facing Cleveland, which could be in store here. You're looking at Pickens at 5,400. They're very cheap. Deontay Johnson is out. So he is out with a hamstring. So he's gone. Brings us to Allen Robinson at 4,300. Had a little bit better. 5 for 8 for 64. While everyone's going to be on Pickens, I think Allen Robinson could be in store for a game here. You got Austin the third, 3,800 or 3,500. 6 for 6 for 37 yards. Wouldn't really look at him at 3,000. We've got Boykin. Wasn't targeted last week. It was 30-7. They did not target him. He did make the final roster, but 3,000, cheap option, throwaway, I'm okay with, but I'm not using him. And the rest, I'm not looking at. So, that being said, again, there's not a lot to like about this Pittsburgh team right now. Moving on to tight end, Freiermuth, Washington, I wouldn't use, obviously. And then Connor Hayward actually got some 8% of the targets. Got the same amount of targets as Pat Freiermuth because he did, I believe Freiermuth left hurt a little bit, right? Yes, okay. Came through for us last week, 7.3. Did have that touchdown. Did leave hurt a little bit. That is why. So you could look at Freiermuth. Looking at matchup-wise, overall, tight end-wise, not a ton to like. Oh, so you could be looking at, I would probably look at Hayden Hurst, overall tight ends. So kind of looking at that defense-wise, when you have 4 games, when there's only, or 2 games with 4 teams, your defense is going to have to go up against some team. So I'm still looking at Saints at 3,700. Why the Saints are up there? Because maybe they think this. I'm going to save a little bit of money and go with the Browns. So that leaves us with about an average of 6,700. Whether or not you want to go with the certain running backs and stuff like that. Jamal Williams, Miles Sanders, 5,700, did a little bit better. We could go with Miles Sanders here. Brings us to a wide receiver. Overall, I think I'm going to go with Shaheed. And then that brings us to 10,000 at the flex. We can afford anybody. Now, that's the thing. Most likely you're not going to use all of your everything there. I suggest looking at flex, take a running back because you're going to get those guaranteed touches. That's kind of what you expect. You're going to get guaranteed touches outside of, that like Jamal Williams is going to touch the ball. You don't know if they're going to throw to a Michael Thomas. You don't know if they're going to throw to a tight end as much. So finding the flex might be the make or break here. While I'm looking, my suggestion, I'm probably going with Jamal Williams. Hopefully he has a better week than he did last week. But that's kind of just my thought building the lineup out if you liked it. And this is the same kind of thought with the showdown. Obviously with captains, you're going to have a very high amount of captains. We actually have a cheat sheet that has showdown for both FanDuel and DraftKings with the picks we like for captain. And then you're always going to find these rotten bacon picks, like Olszewski here at 300, didn't play last week, was inactive due to a decision, but maybe if they activated during the day, if they activate any of these guys, like looking at Goodwin because now Cooper's going to be out. You know, not saying a captain, but a very cheap flex option at 300. Very cheap options. Those are kind of what you can look at. So he's 300 as a captain. I'm betting he's 200 as, yeah, that's kind of what I thought. Good one would be 200 as a flex. So a very cheap option to be able to get, you know, captain-wise. If you want Deshaun Watson, we could look at Deshaun Watson, a Nick Chubb. Kind of looking at Cleveland there. You go with Elijah Moore. You want to get some Pitt in here. We could go with, depending, I think the Browns defense is probably going to do good. And then you could really afford anybody. So, depending on what you want to go with, Allen Robinson, that would be your Pitt guy. Like, that is a game right there. I don't mind that either. So that's just my thought process building this out. If you like the video, if you like the concept, looking through, we can do more of these. Obviously, it'd be a Thursday night football game, then Sunday night, and then Monday night. On top of doing the videos we did for the breakdown, I know a lot of people loved the complete breakdown kind of like this, which it's a longer video, but it helps out a lot. So if you like this, hit the thumbs up button, hit the like button there, subscribe if you have not, share this with your friends. Good luck on Monday Night Football, whether or not you're playing the 4 games, or whether or not you're playing the showdown. So good luck, and we will be back with our rankings and other videos this week. I'm going to do a video on just stacks as well. So we're going to look at stacks. That video might come out on Fridays or Saturdays. It really just depends, trying to figure out all of that information. So good luck on this slate, everyone. Let's bring home some bacon. Peace.